Don't know what happened last one.
3, 2, 1. All right, let's start this. Recycling is bad for the environment. Now, I know what you're all thinking. It's very ingrained in our society. We all want to be Captain Planet, saving the planets in here and out. We all love our blue recycling bins. We all think we're doing good for the environment, but it is on my shoulders to prove to you that actually recycling is bad for the environment and is something we actually need to discontinue. There are many key factors I would like to go over on proving why recycling is bad for the environment. First is the recycling process itself produces pollutants. This is from the exhaust of the trucks that carry our recycled goods to the factories that actually process our recycled goods. One recycling plant in my home state of Washington is the biggest polluter over all facilities in the state of Washington. And guess what the two other biggest polluters in the state are? That's right, recycling plants. What do they recycle? Glass. Glass is the most abundant source of materials we have on the planet. We make glass from sand. Sand is literally everywhere on this planet. There is absolutely no reason to recycle glass. So it's ludicrous that we spend all this time and energy washing, cleaning our glass to basically recycle it into glass when it's cheaper to make it from scratch. You actually waste water, which is more of a less abundant resource than glass, washing it, and it creates pollutants. So that is, in one case, recycling is bad for the environment. The other case that recycling is bad for the environment is there are a lot of, it's not a magical clean process at all, and there are a lot of contaminants that can seep in. There was one case in Taiwan where 12 years after recycling all this steel, it was discovered that they had radiation in the steel, and a lot of people were poisoned because of that. And they didn't notice this till 12 years passed. So yeah, there's also the chance of like spray cans having lead paint. Spray cans are made out of aluminum. Your soda cans are made out of aluminum. There is that possibility of cross-contamination. And yeah, using recycled materials can poison you. It's not a perfect process. We are all humans. Recycling, distribution, and separation is all done by hand. It is very easy for these sorts of contaminants to slip under the cracks, and it could and does happen all the time. The third point I want to bring up, I'd have like 10 points, but I'll stop at 3, is within the case of recycling paper, it creates this toxic substance known as paper sludge. When recycling paper, it creates this, you basically take the pulp and, you know, jettison all the ink, all the other chemicals into it, and it's this waste product. So in recycling, we're actually creating waste. And this, you know, huge sludgeous, terrible thing for the environment, waste product that most of the time just gets thrown away. Most countries have protections against throwing away these sort of waste products, but apparently there is a loophole that if you combine this paper sludge with sand, it turns it into a product, and apparently that's just okay to throw away. So those are my 3 main points. I do have a little bit more on why recycling is bad for the environment, and we pretty much need to discontinue it because the whole process is a lie. We're not saving the environment by recycling. We're in fact making things worse. That is the key of my argument.
Okay. My voice coming out okay?
Yeah.
You hear me? Okay. Recycling, the definition of recycling is basically where you're going to pass it through the process so that you can reuse it, recover it beneficially. Now, I'm going to agree with you right away that like glass is made from sand, and sand is abundant, so recycling glass is probably not beneficial. However, your proposition is recycling, which is a broad sweeping. So if I find one clear example of where recycling is beneficial, then you lose the case because all it takes is one, and I can give you several. Okay, aluminum aluminum cans, aluminum of any sort is very economical to recycle. It takes 1/20th of the electricity to recycle and reuse existing aluminum than it does to fabricate new aluminum. And in fact, we're probably throwing away inadvertently billions of dollars a year of aluminum cans that, if recycled, would save us a tremendous amount of power. I mean, imagine how much power it takes to generate that. And if you could, through recycling, and I've got some numbers here, like, for example, 1 pound of aluminum saves 7 kWh of electricity. And so if you've got 50 billion cans that are not recycled yearly, that's like 17,500 megawatts of power that goes to make new aluminum that would be otherwise made by coal or whatever. And anytime you can save electricity and divert it to normal use, that's very beneficial. So aluminum can be recycled very efficiently. The other big one is steel. And I understand what you're saying. There was a case, and I read about it in Mexico, where through mishandling a radioactive source that would be used for like radiography to check that welds are properly done, it got into the mix, and say they built a building in Mexico City, and it had radioactive material distributed out and increased the background radiation. Easy enough to fix, because the accountability for radioactive sources. Plus, you can use radiation detectors a lot. They're much more convenient. They're much more affordable. You can have radiation detectors. As far as contamination, most of your steel, aluminum, and metals go through a process where they're shredded, and you can magnetically remove steel and you can separate aluminum, because if you have a variable frequency generation, you basically can have a magnet that's changing its polarity and blow aluminum away from steel. So you can pull steel on one direction, you can take aluminum off the other, and the actual processes to recycle steel and recycle aluminum are known, very efficient. They save us tremendous amounts of money. So recycling on those is tremendously beneficial to the environment. Another big one is lead. 80% of our lead use today comes from recycling batteries. You definitely do not want lead batteries, whatever, to be thrown away. Tremendous burden on the environment. You save the environment by recycling lead. Okay, catalytic converters from cars. When you take a car, they'll take cars and they'll throw them to a shredder, and then they will separate the copper, the aluminum, and the steel, but they'll cut the catalytic converter out, because there may be 1/10 of an ounce of platinum or palladium, and that's an expensive precious metal that they will recover that platinum or palladium for reuse in other catalytic converters. Steel, ton for ton, it is the most heavily recycled metal, and they recycle about 1.2 million tons per year. Bottom line, we can argue about paper, we can argue about glass, we can argue about plastic, whether the energy is efficiently used to recycle it versus making new stuff. You probably could make a good case if your resolution was that paper, plastic, and glass should not be recycled. They're adverse to the environment. However, broad sweeping, aluminum, steel, lead, catalytic converters, copper, that stuff it saves a lot of money. It's tremendously beneficial. There's a good use for it, and that recycling should continue. Over to you.
All right. First, I think we need to get into the framework of the debate. This probably should have been done at first. As I'm going through recycling, as in general industrialized recycling, not including salvaging. I consider salvaging is basically taking materials from an object such as the steel, the gold, the platinum from it, and reusing it and other things. I don't really consider salvaging recycling. Yes, salvaging is kind of part of recycling, but I consider that different from recycling. And my argument is recycling as a whole, this whole sort of mentality we have of recycling paper, plastics, steel, this includes everything. the general spectrum. Yes, aluminum is unique, that recycling it does take less energy if you don't count the energy it takes to sort it out from the rest of the trash or the rest of the recyclables. You know, the all-in-one recycling takes more energy to sort it, to clean it, to sort of process it. So there's that energy that we're not counting from just taking, you know, a block of aluminum straight from the earth or virgin materials and making cans from it. That and the recycled aluminum barely makes a dent in demand. Let me pull up the figures here. Demand for more recyclable products is growing way too fast to even keep recycling aluminum up with it. Less than 10% a year of our aluminum cans are even recycled. So in a day, Americans consume about 777 million cans, and 1,000 of those cans are recycled every minute. That still leaves about 600 million cans short in one day from recycling. So it doesn't even, recycling our aluminum doesn't even make a dent in demand. And yet we're able to keep up with that because aluminum actually is a pretty abundant resource too. So yeah, that's just more energy we're putting into sorting trash, cleaning it, and of course all the pollutants from the trucks that carry aluminum. But unfortunately, we don't just have aluminum recycling. There isn't just an aluminum bin. We have to, you know, have the trucks to transport it, and those trucks are emitting toxins, which are hurting the environment, and which is the key point here. Global climate change is probably one of the worst ways to hurt the environment. I mean, if we just didn't, you know, if we put down our carbon footprint and just say buried our aluminum, we'd actually be making less of a carbon footprint than recycling. So that's sort of the irony of all of this, is recycling is harming the environment. I mean, this is, you know, a place where we all live and we all think that we're doing good with it, which is also a problem. When we think that we're doing something good for the environment, much like we think drinking diet soda is good for us, we drink more soda, we increase our consumption, we create more waste because somehow we got into our heads, and this has been confirmed in psychology, that when we think we're doing a good thing for the environment, when we're actually not, because recycling is kind of a lie. We're not doing something good for the environment by recycling. We're not doing something good for the environment from washing and recycling our glass, plastics, and when the one case of aluminum is barely good there to keep on recycling. It's just barely under the line. If we just recycle aluminum, it might be justifiable, but currently, as the status quo is, recycling is actually doing more harm to the environment than good. And I can also display a chart I will put in the a link in the description below later that actually correlates our carbon emissions to our recycling programs. Our recycling hysteria began in the 1970s when you might have heard of that famous barge that was transporting trash around and couldn't find a place to dump it. That sort of like kickstarted the myth that we were being buried by our trash, but in fact, that is just a myth. We have more than enough landfill space, and to think otherwise is completely ludicrous. So actually, ironically, it would be better for the environment if we would just utilize our landfills. It would be more energy efficient than going through recycling.
Well, I think we have to go back to, in terms of if we were going to judge the debate, the resolution was recycling is harmful for the environment. And I've already given examples where properly recycled aluminum, steel, lead, copper, extremely beneficial to the environment, extremely cost effective. Yes, any program can be mismanaged where recycling aluminum could be mismanaged, but most aluminum is recycled through a process where Like, for example, I collect scrap aluminum around my house. I work on projects. I end up with leftover aluminum. The aluminum cans that I have, I take them down to a recycle center and they pay me 30 or 40 cents a pound for aluminum. They collect thousands of pounds a week. That's being recycled and that's beneficial to the environment. Yeah, there's a lot of municipalities that might have a single recycle bin and everything gets thrown in the bin, and the good stuff that's easy to recycle, it now becomes more expensive to pull it out. So you could make a good debate proposition that a lot of the recycle programs at municipalities should be improved, but that doesn't negate the fact that recycling aluminum is very beneficial, and most of the recycling of aluminum is done in a extremely cost-effective and environmentally safe way. And when you're talking about recycling of steel, I've got a little factoid here that every year the United States saves enough energy by recycling steel to supply Los Angeles with nearly a decade's worth of electricity. Now, once again, when you take a car and you run it through a shredder and you sift and sort out, and by the way, back in the 60s and 50s and 60s and 70s, junker cars would go to a salvage yard. There's salvage, and you pull parts off and you reuse parts. It's kind of a frustration nowadays because a lot of salvage yards, because of the worry about oil dripping in and all sorts of problems, a lot of cars, when they're finally thrown away, they basically get turned into shredded metal and get sold to the recycling, where the steel gets sorted out and they melt the steel down. And there's a lot less available parts. You get a dented door and for a 15-year-old car, and you have a hard time finding a replacement door. 30 years ago, salvage yards, you'd buy a replacement door. But the debate proposition is recycling is bad for the environment. Again, I showed you, you don't want lead batteries in our waste stream being buried. Not good. And it would cost a lot. It would be much more deleterious to the environment to go out and dig up and try and find more lead. In fact, the same thing is said for aluminum. You've got to find aluminum ore, which is basically, it's bauxite, it's aluminum oxide. Think of that as like sand, except you're pulling aluminum away from the oxygen instead of silicon from the oxygen. We do the silicon from the oxygen sand when we're making.
I want to keep us a little bit on track here. I want to start by addressing the main key point of the question. You're saying that if you can find one instance where recycling is good, then that negates my argument. I would actually argue the opposite, that my argument is if I can find how recycling is bad, even though some recycling may be good, if it's generally bad, I should win the argument.
But that's not what the proposition said. The proposition you posted, and see, this is where when you set up a debate proposition, you must be accurate with your words. If you had set up a debate proposition that says some recycling is harmful to the environment, and you start showing cases like glass and plastics and paper, I'd concede the point. But you said recycling. There's a big, and all it takes is one example, and I've given multiple examples of where recycling is extremely beneficial, even though you can show that there is some recycling that is bad. However, the debate proposition is recycling is bad. That's an all-inclusive. There is no carve-out. There's no modifiers. There's no...
is bad for the environment. Now, that leads to my question. How does recycling lead and aluminum save the environment? You make the claim earlier in your case that recycling lead and aluminum saves the environment. How is that?
Well, if I throw away aluminum that could be recycled, okay, I go and I need new replacement aluminum. I've got to dig out a lot of aluminum bauxite to make aluminum. I need to generate a lot more electricity, 20 times more electricity to make fresh new aluminum than recycling the old stuff. Pound for pound, it's 20 times more. Okay. And so I've got to dispose of aluminum. I've got to go in and I've got to mine, dig out, and I've got to use all this power. Where's that power coming from? It's coming from something that, unless I've got a totally environmentally friendly source of power, and right now, 35 to 40% of our power is coal, and well, basically, we'll just work the other way. 20% of our power is nuclear, 5% is solar, and maybe less than 30% is environmentally friendly neutral stuff. The other 70% is coal, natural gas, oil, petroleum, whatever. And so if I'm going to generate, so let's assume that 70% of the power for making new aluminum, I could get that 70% down to 1/20th. That's going to benefit the environment. I'm not going to dig as many mines and pits to get the aluminum, the bauxite for the aluminum ore. So, and the same thing is going to be said for steel. If I throw steel away, I've got to go and get new mines, more steel. It gets harder and harder. A lot of our good mines, that the easy to get stuff has already been mined out, so we have to go and find new sources. So if I can recycle, I'm saving the environment. I don't have to dig out and go find new stuff. Now, paper, hey, trees grow. There's big, huge tree farms. It's energy efficient to cut new trees down. We grow trees. I mean, they've got tree farms that they grow fast growing and they can make new, fresh paper. Right. But even on something like newspaper, are you aware of the fact that 30 or 40 years ago, newspapers, when they were printing, the ink was toxic? But less than 30 years ago, they came up with soy-based inks that are not toxic. So you can actually recycle newspaper, and it's environmentally friendly, because if I take my newsprint out, the ink is not, I can make my paper sludge and it's not toxic. It's not the same problem that it used to be 30 years ago. But I'm not going to try and defend paper recycling. I'm going to defend the fact that most metals are environmentally beneficial to recycle. Hence, your proposition fails because you were too inclusive. You said recycling, not some. Sorry.
Well, I would argue that most of the metal recycling is considered salvaging and not actually industrialized recycling. And
did you say scavenging or salvaging?
Salvaging.
Salvaging. Okay, but that's salvaging is reusing, like car salvage large.
Yeah. I think we are
compare the definition of salvage versus recycle.
Yeah. Because when you recycle aluminum, yes, you put it through a process, you melt it down, and there's relatively little waste with aluminum compared to other recycling. I do agree with that aluminum is inherently valuable. But also with recycling aluminum, everyone knows aluminum is valuable, such as there is salvaging of aluminum. You might witness homeless people going through trash cans, digging up the trash to find the aluminum because aluminum is valuable.
But it's going to be recycled. I'm going to take a look and basically say that I think you're misusing the term salvaging, because salvaging, it's like you're not really, the idea of, I'm looking at the definition, salvage, like if you had a cargo ship, you're going to try and pull that stuff off and reuse that stuff without necessarily reprocessing it. Okay, aluminum can,
for example, taking a plastic bottle, making a bird feeder, I would consider that salvaging a plastic bottle, not recycling.
Now, you look like you're about what, 24, 25?
Oh, thank you so much.
30?
I'm 34.
Okay. The thing you take a look at is that, I mean, back a long time ago, it used to be that Coke bottles were glass and they were really thick. And I use generic Coke. Okay. Pepsi, anything that was carbonated was in bottles, and there was a 5-cent deposit. And 5-cent deposit 40 or 50 years ago would be like a 50-cent deposit today. And those bottles
Mhm.
were cleaned and reused because it was more economical because of the cost of the processing of. I mean, nowadays, our processes are more efficient. So we can make sand into glass bottles or plastic bottles, and it's a lot cheaper. And you save the energy. But 50 years ago, the market forces, they had this 5 cent deposit and they reused bottles. Imagine that. Reuse it. I mean, and when you brought your bottles back, they'd take a look and go, oh, this has got a chip off the thing. We can't give you any money for it because that bottle cannot be reused. They were, for all practical purposes, that was salvaging and reusing bottles because they would be cleaned and reused. A salvage yard, like automotive, they're taking doors off and reusing the door. They're reusing stuff. But when I take a car, salvage yard may take a look and say, the engine works. We're going to take the engine out and we're going to sell the engine to somebody else. But if I take an old car that I figure has little market value and I feed it through a gigunda shredder, you got to look on YouTube for automobile shredder, and you see these things where they've got this big claw, picks up an entire car, drops it in, and it shreds it. And they shred that in, and then they have automatic processes, not manual, not people, that will separate all the different metals. The glass goes off one way, the rubber goes off another way. Then they find ways of retrieving steel, aluminum, copper, and such. This is truly reprocessing, recycling. It is not salvage. And steel is very economically efficient for recycling. It benefits the environment.
But what percentage of all recycling is steel? It seems like a very, very low percentage that I'm not even sure it's having much of an economic impact. I mean, we recycle a ton of plastics, a ton of glass, a ton of paper. But if you see the recycling bins lined up, it's like compost, glass, paper, aluminum, and maybe the case of aluminum, and just maybe. And my argument of maybe not even aluminum is, one, recycling isn't even creating a dent in the aluminum demand, so much that if we discontinued that process, saved our carbon emissions for just landfill, we would actually reduce CO2 emissions and actually maybe help save the environment and the rising sea levels and global warming and climate change.
Which we can have a separate debate on global warming and climate change, because I'm leery of a lot of the claims there, and I've got a science background. We could have a separate debate, but let's just take a look at the fact that, just for your information, the recycling rate of steel packaging is about 46% because it's easy. You can have a waste stream with magnets that pull steel stuff out. Aluminum is only about 24%. And because the aluminum recycling rates are low, and it would be environmentally beneficial for higher recycling rates, one of the things that you've done is you've got some states that have got a 5%, a 5 cent deposit on aluminum cans. And Oregon recently went to 10-cent deposit because that forces the recycle rate better. Okay. And
well, I'd argue that was just inflation. I think Oregon increased their amount just because of inflation.
They increased it because they weren't getting. The other surrounding states like Idaho and others, they're still at 5%. Basically, Oregon is one of these nanny states that says people are not properly recycling, so we're going to force it by upping the price. And guess what? I've got a daughter who lives in Oregon, and a lot of times it was the idea that at 5%, we're not going to bother wasting our time. Oh, 10 cents again? 10 cents? Forget it. We're going to recycle. Okay. There is a big difference in it.
Yeah. How increasing the price, to basically match inflation. I think if it would actually match inflation, it could be even closer to a quarter, which would definitely motivate people to recycle more. Because yes, I'm not arguing that people are motivated by money. I'm arguing that generally recycling, even though we think we're doing a good thing, is actually harming the environment and actually creating more bad habits within the instance we agree upon. With other than contaminants of aluminum and steel, that
So
you
you're
know,
giving me
obviously,
recycle of aluminum steel is good, and you ought to go ahead and give me lead, because do you really want lead batteries in our environment being thrown away in wastes?
it literally would not impact our environment at all. And I need to actually wrap this up
You say
since my battery is dying
you say you live
quicker than I can recharge it.
you say you live in Washington.
Yeah,
Whereabouts in Washington do you live?
yeah, I live in Seattle.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that there used to be a huh?
My argument of throwing away a battery or throwing away lead is inconsequential because all of our modern landfills are encased with clay. They have
Okay,
huge environmental risk.
understand. However,
It's
let's
not
take a
going to
look.
see.
Are you aware of the fact that there
Yeah.
used to be a lead smelter in Tacoma?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, a lot of concerns with lead, and the byproducts when you're smelting lead are not necessarily a good thing. So if I stop putting recycled lead back into the stream, I've got to mine a lot more lead. I need those lead smelters that are going to be providing a lot of toxic problems. So lead's lead reuse, it's not that the lead that being thrown away is necessarily bad. We can argue whether it's good or bad. I'm saying from an energy standpoint, we shouldn't. And from a standpoint that it avoids us having to smelt new lead, big saving there. Are you still there? Hello? Hello? You may have dropped off. I don't know. You still there? I don't know what happened. I will post. I'm going to just fill in a little bit of dead time until you get back in. See if you do come back in. I'll post a website for recycling facts that just lists a whole lot of things. The interesting one I heard about aluminum. Americans throw away, not recycle, enough aluminum every month to rebuild our entire commercial air fleet. Imagine that we had just say 10,000 airplanes. Well, every month we do not recycle enough aluminum cans and aluminum other products that would build another 10,000 airplanes. Okay, that's an awful lot of aluminum. And steel mill that recycles scrap steel, it reduces water pollution, air pollutants, and mining waste by 70%. There's your savings. So recycling steel and aluminum, definitely big. Well, I think Daniel has disappeared, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this.